The first thing Ronan Vale noticed about the flagship was how desperately it wanted to be a shrine. Its main corridor rose in sweeping ribs of pale alloy, each curve arching overhead like the bones of some sainted beast. Lines of light ran through, etched grooves, not quite letters and not quite circuitry, pulsing in time with the ship's slow breathing hum. The air itself carried a sweetness that didn't belong in a weapons platform. Real incense, drifting from vents like the vessel was trying to pray its own engines into obedience. Underneath it lurked the sharper bite of ozone and sterilized metal. Ronan stopped on the threshold long enough to take in the spectacle, then huffed a quiet laugh through his nose. "A battleship that needs blessings," he muttered. "That's one way to admit you're nervous." He'd been hired to train a royal guard, not admire architecture. Still, the soldiers lining the passage clearly expected him to. They stood at attention in ceremonial armor polished to mirror shine, holding spears that looked ancient until you noticed the faint heat shimmer. Around their edges contained energy, waiting for permission. Ronan shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and walked between them with the lazy confidence of a man strolling through a market. His boots clapped against the deck in deliberate, uneven rhythm. He nodded to one guard, tilted his head to another, as if greeting shopkeepers rather than the personal blade line of an alien monarch. A couple stiffened. One scowled outright. Ronan decided that was an excellent start. Above the corridor, a gallery ran like a balcony in a cathedral. A figure watched him from there, still as an icon. Queen Seren was taller than he expected. Not towering, but long-limbed and composed in a way that made the space around her feel arranged. Her skin held a deep sea hue that caught the white light in smooth gradients, as if the ship had adjusted its illumination just to flatter her. Her ears swept back in elegant arcs, banded with thin rings of silver that marked lineage and rank. From a distance, a human might have mistaken her for one of their own until she moved. No human carried stillness like that, as if movement was something to be rationed. Her gaze measured Ronan's stride, the way his eyes flicked to doors, corners, ceiling angles without seeming to think about it. When he nearly tripped over a shifting floor glyph and inlaid pattern that subtly changed underfoot, she felt a tiny, inconvenient spark of amusement. Training began within the hour. Ronan didn't bother asking permission. He stepped into the practice chamber, took one look at the guards assembled in rows of gleaming ceremony, and said, "If anyone came here expecting pretty duels, you're about to be heartbroken." A captain in elaborate armor bristled. "Our methods are sanctioned by tradition." Ronan tilted his head. "Has tradition ever stopped a plasma bolt?" Silence answered him thick, offended and absolute. Ronan crossed the room, plucked a training spear from the rack, and waited like a butcher judging a knife. Then he flipped it end over end, stepped in, and swept the captain's legs with the haft so cleanly the man hit the mat before he realized he'd fallen. Ronan offered a hand down. "Good news. You've just learned the first lesson." The captain glared up from the floor. "And what is that?" "How to land without turning your ribs into confetti." By the second hour, the chamber smelled like sweat and bruised pride. Armor plates showed dents. Decorative crests had been knocked crooked. Ronan moved through them like a storm in boots, correcting stances, kicking feet wider, barking again, until the word lost meaning between drills. He cracked jokes comparing their formation to a very angry wall. That's thinking about applying for a job, and praised one particularly quick guard for only almost dying. At first the laughter came out thin and wary, as if it might be punished. Then it came genuine, bubbling through exhaustion. Even the captain, nursing his ego, snorted once despite himself. Up in the gallery, Queen Seren stayed longer than she intended. Her expression remained controlled, but her mouth tightened as if resisting a smile. The humans' methods were inelegant, even disrespectful by their standards, and undeniably effective. More troubling was how quickly he adapted. He read their alien physiology like he'd trained them all his life, adjusting angles for joints that weren't shaped like his, correcting balance for different centers of mass, exploiting reflex patterns. With unsettling ease, when the session ended, Ronan bowed in the vague direction of the gallery, not entirely sure where she stood, and called up. "So where do I find an armory that doesn't look like it's going to judge me?" A chamberlain escorted him out. Queen Seren remained, alone with the hum of the ship and the weight of what lay ahead, somewhere beneath the decks. Engines changed pitch as the fleet shifted course. A faster void current caught them, vibrating through the metal like an omen. Invasion waited in front of them like a shadow no one wanted to name. Ronan felt it too. Later, in a quieter corridor, he leaned back against a cool wall and exhaled slowly. He was good at pretending ease, but even he couldn't ignore the pressure in the air, the expectation packed into the ship's very bones. He looked down at his hands, scarred, steady, familiar. What kind of queen builds a warship that smells like a temple? He murmured. The answer, apparently, was the kind of queen who carried secrets large enough to swallow star systems. The armory was quieter than Ronan liked, which immediately made him suspicious. Rows of armor hung in gravity fields like obedient ghosts awaiting resurrection. The floor vibrated with a low murmur of conduits, steady as a distant drum. The room smelled of cold metal and stored power. Everything about it was too reverent, too clean, too careful, like a place where people whispered because the objects might overhear. Ronan whistled softly, mostly to offend the atmosphere, and laid out his gear on a slab of dark stone. That looked better suited for sacrifices than maintenance. He stripped without ceremony, peeling layers off with the efficient impatience of someone who dressed for combat too many times to find it romantic. His armor was the opposite of the ship's, modular, ugly, and honest, scarred plates. Patchwork components from manufacturers who would have hated seeing their work cooperate. A shoulder piece that had clearly been repaired, with whatever metal happened to be available at the time. Functional in a way that made aesthetics surrender. When he reached for the spinal plate, he paused. Warmth spread along his back, familiar as an old bruise. Beneath his skin, lines shifted a tattoo that wasn't simply ink, but something deeper. The pattern responded to movement like a living circuit, rearranging itself by fractions, refusing to stay still. Ronan didn't look. He never looked. You didn't stare at things that had survived you. He didn't hear Queen Seren enter. But the armory did. The hum dimmed by a fraction. Lights adjusted with reverent precision, as if the ship itself stood straighter. Saren stopped just inside the threshold, intending only to observe the human's equipment, to understand his methods. Curiosity was an indulgence, and indulgences could be controlled. Right up until Ronan lifted this spinal plate and the mark across his back fully revealed itself. For a heartbeat, time broke. The lines were unmistakable, not just the pattern, but the way it existed, part flesh, part quantum echo, refusing to behave like something that belonged in one reality. It looked less like a symbol and more like a presence. Saren's breath caught, sharp and involuntary. Her people's oldest dread lived in that shape. The emblem of the Abyss Wardens, the oath-bearers spoken of in sealed archives. Etched into ruins older than her dynasty, artists had tried to render it, but always failed to capture its wrongness. The sense that it watched back. Now it was alive on the spine of a human mercenary who was muttering about stubborn armor. Latches, Ronan sensed the silence stretching. Too long. He half-turned, grinning automatically. If this is a no-shoes in the armory situation, I should warn you I've offended at least 3 religious institutions today. He caught Saren's expression and stopped. Something had shifted in the room that had nothing to do with gravity. The Queen recovered with effort. Composure slid back into place like a practiced mask. But her eyes stayed fixed, wide and unblinking. "Finish your preparations," she said, voice steady only by force. I did not intend to interrupt. Ronan fumbled the spinal plate into place faster than usual, suddenly feeling exposed in a way armor didn't fix. Right. Armor modesty laws vary by system. I really should start looking those up. Saren didn't smile. That frightened him more than if she had. She turned and left without another word, ears rigid, steps measured. The armory lights brightened again, ignorant of the fracture they'd just witnessed. Ronan stood still for several seconds, then let out a slow breath. "Well," he muttered. That was normal, but the warmth under the plates didn't fully fade. A faint vibration lingered, like a system refusing to power down. Elsewhere, Queen Saren moved through corridors she'd walked since childhood, barely seeing them. Memory pressed in like smoke, a bloodline nearly snuffed out. A betrayal that had rewritten their history. The Wardens had sworn to stand between her ancestors and annihilation, and then they had vanished so completely. That belief in them became almost childish. And yet the mark was real. The ship knew it. She felt it in the way dormant subsystems stirred beneath her feet, resonance changing. Subtly as she passed, a human with a careless grin and terrible posture should not carry the imprint of her people's deepest oath. If he did, it was either a miracle or the universe savoring a cruel joke. Saren wasn't sure which terrified her more. That night, she didn't sleep. She went to the deepest archive chamber, sealed not by locks, but by blood. The doors parted with a sound like distant thunder, recognizing lineage rather than command. Pale crystalline walls glowed, and glyphs shifted when she tried to look at them directly. As if embarrassed to be remembered, she ran her fingers over a memory plinth, and the ship responded by projecting fragments of the past into the air. Ghost images bloomed, tall figures in unfamiliar armor standing beside queens, who looked uncomfortably like her. Their faces were always indistinct, blurred, as though reality itself had agreed not to remember them too clearly. They were real, Saren whispered. The ship hummed in answer, a low harmonic that vibrated through her bones. Then the memories fractured into catastrophe fire, collapsing spires, alarms screaming in tones that scraped the mind. The Wardens fought, died, and disappeared. Records ended abruptly, corrupted so deeply modern systems couldn't reconstruct them. A deliberate erasure. Saren clenched her fists until her nails bit her palms. The oath hadn't been broken. It had been buried. Meanwhile, Ronan was having a very different kind of crisis. The next morning in the training hall, the guards were suddenly too polite. Where they'd scowled yesterday, today they bowed. One offered him a ration bar wrapped in ceremonial cloth. Ronan accepted it cautiously, sniffed it, and said, "If this explodes, I want it officially recorded that I died trusting a person in a fancy helmet." No one laughed. That was the alarming part. During drills, the ship behaved oddly. Systems lagged half a second whenever Ronan crossed certain inlaid lines. Target drones adjusted mid-flight as if reconsidering their life choices. A barrier flickered into existence directly in front of him, blocking a simulated plasma burst that hadn't even been aimed at him. Ronan stared at the barrier. "Okay," he said to the empty air. "That's new." A technician rushed over with frantic apologies, blaming calibration errors that didn't make sense. Ronan nodded along, but the warmth began stirring beneath his armor again, faint and insistent. He joked about haunted ships and cursed tattoos, but the sound felt thinner than usual. Later, he was summoned to a private chamber. The room was stark. No incense, no arches, no ritual, smooth walls, clean light. Queen Saren gestured for him to sit. Ronan did so carefully, like a man unsure whether the chair might be offended. "You've noticed changes," Saren said. "I've noticed. Your ship likes me," Ronan replied. "I don't know why. I haven't even bought it dinner." A pause, then Saren exhaled something almost like a laugh. Brief, sharp, quickly swallowed. "That may be the most unsettling part," she murmured. Her gaze sharpened. "The mark on your back. Do you know what it is?" Ronan shrugged. "It itches when I'm about to get shot at. And it's the reason several people tried to kill me before I learned to shoot back." Her expression tightened. "You were given no explanation." "Dying people aren't great at lectures," Ronan said, and surprised himself by keeping his voice gentle. "They mostly say things like, 'Run and don't trust anyone.'" The ship shifted around them, engines adjusting as the fleet approached hostile space. Saren straightened, the Queen returning to her spine. "Then we are both inheritors of things we never asked for," she said. Ronan smiled crookedly. "Sounds like family." She didn't correct him. When the fleet crossed into contested space, Ronan expected drama sirens, chants, maybe a choir, given the ship's personality. Instead, the stars simply bent. Outside the viewport, color stretched into unfamiliar geometry as the flagship slid through a region that resisted. Passage. The deck vibrated, not like motion, but like reluctance. Lights dimmed and brightened in slow pulses. Ancient defense matrices supposedly dormant began humming as if clearing long unused throats. On the bridge, Saren felt the change keenly. Systems aligned not to her commands, but to something deeper, older, to him. She summoned Ronan. He arrived with his helmet under one arm. Expression balanced between relaxed and profoundly unimpressed by destiny. "If this is about the ship trying to adopt me," he said, "I'm flattered. But I don't do long-term commitments. You carry an oath you do not understand," Saren replied. "And my crown carries a secret I was never meant to reveal." That sounds like the start of a terrible partnership. Terrible partnerships either end in explosions, she said quietly, or prevent them. She led him below the bridge, down into a chamber so deep the engine hum faded into near silence. At its center hung a structure of interlocking crystal and black metal, suspended in a gravity cradle that bent light round it. Power flowed through it in slow, terrifying rhythms, like a heartbeat that could stop other hearts. "The null crown," Saren said, "a failsafe bound to my bloodline. If activated, it collapses every star system within its reach, including ours, including theirs." Ronan stared. "You people really don't believe in moderation." "It has never been used," Saren said, "because the Abyss Wardens existed to stop us, to stop me." A distant impact shuddered through the ship. The first enemy strike. Alarms finally sounded low. Resonant, almost offended, Ronan's. Tata burned. Not an itch now, but a brand. A pull toward the device that made his teeth ache. He took a step back instead. "Yeah," he said slowly. "If this thing thinks I'm here to flip the universal kill switch, it's going to be disappointed." Saren's composure cracked for a heartbeat. "You would refuse?" "I'm a mercenary," Ronan said. "I like my work survivable. Also, blowing up everything tends to reduce repeat business." For a moment, tension broke, and Saren laughed unexpected, bright, quickly stifled. "You mock the end of worlds." "Someone has to," Ronan said. "Otherwise it gets ideas." Another impact. The battle was fully joined. Ronan slid his helmet on and sealed it with a hiss. "Tell me where you need me," he said. "Not where prophecy says I should stand where you want me." Saren met his gaze. Something shifting between them. Trust, perhaps, or the first fracture in fate's grip. "At my side," she said. The flagship surged forward. The cathedral became a weapon with opinionated grace. The first volleys struck the shields like accusations. Light racing along those arching ribs overhead, as if the ship itself were bracing. Stabilizers corrected with offended precision. Ronan laughed despite himself. "All right," he said, voice echoing inside his helmet. "Now it feels like work." Enemy ships unfolded into view-angular predators that bent space locally to cheat momentum. They'd come expecting a wounded god. What they hadn't planned for was a god waking up eager. Weapons that hadn't fired in centuries came online with a deep, satisfied resonance Ronan felt along his spine. His tatter flared hot, lines tightening, aligning. He hissed through his teeth. "I really hate it," he muttered, sprinting down. corridors, when parts of my body sync up with something the size of a city. The royal guards fell in behind him, without question now. Blaster fire rattled bulkheads ahead. A breach alarm screamed as an enemy boarding unit tore through hull, plating in a storm of compressed particles. Ronan rolled under a spray of fire, came up, and shot with crisp economy. The guards followed his lead instinctively, formations breaking and reforming with lethal efficiency. Doors sealed as he passed. Gravity shifted in subtle lurches that threw invaders off balance. Defensive fields flickered alive where he needed them before he asked. Between bursts, Ronan found himself calling out angles and timings he didn't remember learning. Pressure points, choke routes, old tactics. That fit the ship's internal layout like he'd been born in it. He laughed breathlessly. Okay, he admitted. That's impressive. On the bridge, Saren watched displays with equal parts awe and fear. The null crown chamber pulsed brighter with every engagement, reacting to the same resonance as Ronan's mark. The old story tightened like a noose. Protect the bloodline by any means. A direct hit rocked the ship. Power flickered. Containment fields deep below wailed their displeasure. Ronan stumbled, caught himself, and felt the tatter blaze like wildfire. The pull sharpened no longer suggestion, but command. He slammed a fist into the wall, pain grounding him. No, he growled. We're not doing that. He opened a channel. Saren, your doomsday relic is getting ideas. I know, she replied instantly. I feel it too. Then listen carefully, Ronan said, voice hard. If it tries to activate, I am unplugging it, possibly violently. A pause. Then Saren said, very quietly, I am counting on you. Something in Ronan shifted. The pull didn't vanish, but it changed less like a leash, more like a question. He barked out a sharp laugh. Ha! Turns out trust works better than destiny. Instead of being dragged toward the null crown, he ran toward its junction. He diverted energy flow manually, rerouting ancient conduits with movements that felt remembered, not learned. The ship responded, humming approval, redirecting power, choosing precision over annihilation. Enemy ships faltered, systems failed, boarding units lost. Coordination. The flagship's countermeasures disabled rather than erased, forcing retreat instead of extinction. One by one, hostile signatures winked out or fled. Silence returned, creeping into corridors still warm with violence. Ronan leaned against her. Bulkhead slid down until he sat on the deck, armor scorched, heart pounding. Next time, he said aloud, I'm charging extra for prophetic nonsense. On the bridge, Saren let out a slow exhale. The null crown dimmed, thwarted not by force, but by refusal. The invasion ended not as anyone predicted, but it ended. And somewhere deep inside the ship, ancient systems recorded the deviation like a new scripture. Afterward, emergency lights eased back to proper brightness. Repair drones moved through scorched corridors with almost impatient efficiency, as if the battle cathedral resented the mess. Ronan walked slowly now, helmet tucked under his arm, armor unsealed, boots leaving echoes that no longer sounded like countdowns. He stopped outside the null crown chamber. The structure hung inert, its crystal lattice dark, the warmth along. His spine had faded to a memory. For the first time he could remember, there was no pull, no whisper telling him where to stand or what to protect next. The absence felt lighter and strangely insulting, like being fired by destiny without notice. Queen Seren joined him. She looked tired in a way no crown could hide, posture eased by the simple fact. The universe hadn't ended under her watch. They stood together, watching technicians dismantle components once treated as sacred inevitabilities. Ronan cleared his throat. Good news. Your ship no longer wants to commit cosmic murder. Bad news. I think it's sulking. Seren made a sound that might have been laughter. It will recover. It always does. Perhaps it will learn restraint. Big lesson for a big ship. She turned to him. Expression serious but unguarded. The Wardens were never meant to. And like this, they were bound to sacrifice, not choice. Ronan shrugged a small, human gesture. Turns out choice works better. Less screaming. They walked toward the observation deck, where stars lay clean and indifferent across the void. The fleet held position now, weapons powered down. Messages flowed between ships' diplomats, already trying to turn survival into precedent. Seren faced the viewport. My bloodline will be different now. The crown no longer carries a secret. That can destroy us all. That burden is gone. Ronan considered it. Guess that makes you just a queen, then. Must be disappointing. She smiled fully this time, the edges of her eyes creasing. It is liberating. Silence settled between them, comfortable now. Ronan felt the old itch to leave, the mercenary instinct. But it lacked urgency. For the first time, he wasn't running from something burned into his skin. He was simply standing, allowed to be here without a symbol steering him. "What will you do?" Seren asked. He answered honestly, "I might stay, train your guards properly, teach them how to fall without dying. Maybe figure out who I am without an ancient mark making decisions for me." She nodded. "You would be welcome. Not as an oath, as a person." Ronan smiled, softer than before. "Careful," he said. "That's how people end up with responsibilities. As queen." She replied dryly, "I am intimately familiar with that risk." The flagship adjusted course. Engines hummed with renewed purpose, not toward war, but away from it. Ronan watched the stars shift and felt something settle inside him. An understanding that protection didn't have to mean erasure. That guardianship could be chosen daily, not imposed by an old story written in someone else's blood. Behind them, the gnarled crown chamber sealed permanently, its threat dismantled piece by piece. Ahead, the future didn't glow with warnings or symbols. It was simply open. Ronan Vale squared his shoulders, exhaled, and stepped forward into it and claimed, by prophecy, accompanied by a queen who had chosen trust over annihilation.